Welcome back, everybody. This next set of graphs pertains to cost curves, but in the long run, or going from the short run to the long run. On the x-axis, I have quantities. On the vertical axis, I have dollars per unit. And we're going to show ultimately average cost curves, both in the short and the long run. Maybe a place to use as an example would be like our cookie factory. So let's come back to the classroom and recall that we had one table, we had two knives, and over the course of adding more workers, we got a short run cost curve that had this U-shaped. SRATC stands for short run average total cost. I could also put in the marginal cost. The reason it has a U-shaped was, remember, rising marginal costs. I'm not going to put in the marginal cost curve because it's going to make this picture too complicated. But no, suppose instead that was in the short run, and we saw that occur because of diminishing returns. We had this U-shape, we have rising marginal cost. But again, instead, suppose we are able to get more fixed inputs. Like we were able to vary the fixed input. It'd be like a new short run. So instead of the one table and two knives, suppose I have 3 tables and 6 knives, something like that, in my classroom. But because of that, from specialization and efficiencies even further, maybe each table could specialize in a task. But still be in a new short run there, but maybe we'd be able to do it a little bit better, in which case costs actually go down around a new set of fixed inputs. That new U-shaped curve is short run average cost curve 2. It also would have a marginal cost, but I'm not going to put it in there because it would make this graph too complicated. If we even expanded further, suppose I have a whole new operation across the hall in a whole nother classroom. This way we could maybe make use of managerial duties that could be split between the 2 classrooms, making use of that cost advantage. But we'd be in a new short run there too, and so the short run average cost curve, still U-shaped, but like lower than the other ones. And so like kind of a general trend here is that average costs over time might be falling. And that's the pattern that is sort of starting to emerge here. However, suppose we start expanding even further, opening up like other cookie factories and other classrooms down the hall, even in a different building, in which case now it might start being more complicated to produce. And the classic case here is kind of the firms getting too big. It becomes hard to manage. Now, another, say, in a different short run, average costs might be getting bigger at this point. If that happened even further, we'd have even rising marginal costs here. The kind of classic reasons for this is that the firm is getting too big. It becomes harder to manage. And coordinating between different managers across large operation, it sometimes starts getting difficult for the different parts of the business or the operation to know what the other parts are doing and how to find cost effectiveness. Another classic reason here is what's called the principal agent problem, in which case, like the owner of the whole operation and then those working for the operation have those clashes of self-interest. There's always a principal agent problem that always exists. However, in some cases, especially in a big operation, it's easier for them to like reveal themselves. But overall, it leads to like maybe higher average costs at bigger and bigger sizes. If we were to pick a point on each one of these short run average cost curves, we can imagine it being like the profit maximizing point. But that's fine for now. So we're going to imagine a point at each one of those cost curves and sort of draw the general trend. The general trend is actually over time, the long run average cost curve, and that's what LRATC stands for. The long run average cost curve also has a U shape. But it has a U shape for a different reason than the short run average cost curves. The short run average cost curve has a U shape because of rising marginal costs. And marginal costs rise in the short run because of diminishing returns, because of a fixed input. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here, there is no fixed input. We don't have diminishing returns. What we have is we have rising average costs because of like coordination problems that happen with firms that are too big. That said, these different periods on the average cost curve in the long run, Like falling average costs in the long run are called economies of scale. And that's a generalized term that you even see in other courses that has to do with like size, like make the firm bigger, and if the firm is bigger, it's like more cost effective. Examples would be like the railroads, things that have like sometimes big startup costs, but then it's sort of more useful if they're producing more quantities. That's called economies of scale. If average costs are constant in over time, that's called constant returns to scale. And then if you get to this period where average costs start rising as the firm is producing more quantities, that's called diseconomies of scale. And note, although the average cost curve does look like a U, if we were to draw it without those little short-run average cost curves, it would still look like a U. But it's a U for a different reason than the short-run average costs. The short-run average cost curve, again, to repeat, is U-shaped because of diminishing returns and rising marginal costs. Diseconomies of scale is a long-run concept, which is happening because of firms being too big, not because of diminishing returns, not because of like falling marginal products. Overall, it just kind of gives just another picture of costs that we can see with firms from the short run to the long run. And that concludes this section.